here, and you're absolutely right. It's a long history with the OECD. It's been, well, yeah, more years than I want to count. So I'm very glad to be able to take this opportunity and also to be in touch with so many colleagues from around the world, people that I've been working with for many, many years. Let me plunge right in, do this without much ado, and just set the stage from my perspective as, in some senses, an old OECD hand. So let me just, there we go. I want to start with, my slides coming up? They're fine. I wanted to start with continuity and change. And I just wanted to kind of remind us of the extent to which we're experiencing a period of significant transition, but that this is not new. In the sense that these transitions are characteristic of the last few centuries, and they're part of the way in which the use of the future is contextualized. And that's really a large part of what I want to talk about today in general, is the way in which the future gets positioned in the functioning of our social and economic systems. And I just wanted to also really push this idea that one of the aspects of the change that's taking place, and one of the reasons that I think futures literacy is so central and crucial, has to do with the shift from material to immaterial production. The material is obviously a field where the scale and standardization, production on the basis of mass consumption, mass production, make huge sense. But in the context of the immaterial, we begin to move into a very different context. This is not something that's new. It was certainly something discussed already by Daniel Bell. It was discussed very extensively by in the Networked Society, Manuel Castells. It was very much part of the debate and discussion around the dot-com boom and the advent of the internet. But it's important not to lose sight of this changing condition. Furthermore, I think it's really crucial to acknowledge, or to make kind of a point of recognizing that the catch-up and convergence version, which in large part is encapsulated by the Sustainable Development Goals, that this catch-up and convergence towards the, let's call it the ideal welfare state in an industrial society, is a false history, essentially. That's not the way it happened for OECD countries, and it's not the way it's going to happen, I think, for the rest of the world. And furthermore, that definition of development, I think, is fundamentally lacking on a number of different fronts, not least of which is obviously the extractivism related to what we can see now in terms of climate. And just to remind us also that the hype cycles many of us have lived through, and I'm just picking up this one because it's a, it makes it look funny. Fourth industrial, third industrial, nanotech, biotech, blockchain, the LLM hype cycle that we're currently in. These are things to keep in mind. Let's not forget, and it hasn't been forgotten entirely, but this mismeasuring our lives 2010 remains very fundamental. What is value? Is it commodified? Is it competitive? Is it efficient? Is it massified? Is it scaled? Is it repetitive? Repetition being one of the key crucial aspects of the material economy, buildings that last for ages, products that last for ages, mass production, which repeats the production, improves on it, but it's repetitive? Or is it about meaning, learning, novelty, and difference? And I think this is, again, a crucial aspect of this transition to the immaterial society. And that means, from my perspective, that we're involved in addressing transition questions. And it's one from the dominance of the material, focused on repetition, to the immaterial, focused on difference. What are the conditions, the collective enablers, and who resists the counter-revolution and the reaction to the change? I mean, this is on some senses the scale of when the property rights owners of the nobility and the feudal era moved they said, look, our assets are in land, the wealth of the country is in land. Physiocrats believe in agriculture as the source of surplus value. What is all this factory and manufacturing about? It's just going to make us poor. Obviously, there was a huge shift in power when you shift the sources and the nature of production. So I want to think about changes in the conditions of change. such as the generalization of the capacity to read and write, that augmented the ability to speak and helped to enable the transition to urban industrial communities. I don't think it was planned. It was the result of a wide variety of evolutionary factors. It was experimented. It emerged as something obvious eventually in the 19th century. Reading and writing was crucial to move peasants from the countryside into the city, to work in factories, to show up on time, to be obedient, to be able to speak to each other, to have a common language. All of those things we know were fundamental to the industrial transformations we experienced in OECD countries. The current transition is what might augment the ability to comprehend, generate, find value in difference. And I think it's really important to put this into the forefront. Difference is, from my point of view, the fundamental characteristic of this universe. It's not repetition. Repetition can be sustained for a certain period of time, but everything decays, and birth and death are fundamental to understanding the world around us, the end of empire being one of them. So how can we think about changes in the conditions of change? How can we become better at being able to distinguish what we're working on? And frankly, I say this in a strong way from a policy perspective, because I believe from a policy perspective, it's crucial to be able to identify if what we're doing is intended to sustain an existing system inside in, to engage in endogenous improvement, which confronts emergence, complexity, and innovation, but within a bounded framework, and is obviously much more easily addressed through a risk approach, which abstracts from uncertainty. You can't eliminate uncertainty, but you abstract from uncertainty and make ceteris paribus assumptions about improving within existing systems. Outside in looks, tries to detect, tries to sense and make sense of emergence and novelty, things that are potentially incompatible with what's going on inside an endogenous system, but perhaps can adapt them or create ways of improving from within the system. Inside out is how the kind of offshoots and waste and things that get thrown away from the inside systems, but also things that happen simply outside the existing system. Children grow up outside; they're not their parents, and they grow up and they become something completely different. And the outside out is what we know as a novelty from the perspective of something that has no name before, that is impossible to anticipate, is uncertainty in the sense of creativity that emerges not necessarily through a causal chain, but in the basis of something that pops because the conditions are there and the moment arrives. So these are things that I think are really relevant to the way we think about the future and can use the future. And one of the main arguments that I'm trying to make is that by being futures literate and having a better understanding of anticipatory systems, we not only are better able to identify, and I'll go back to the slide, the inside in, outside in, inside out and outside out, in other words, distinguish different aspects of change, but we're better able to kind of craft approaches that experiment within those boundaries and also envisage potentially cross-boundary transitions. So here we come to the one of the cruxes of futures literacy as well. One of the key aspects is, can we imagine less colonization of our imagination and less efforts to colonize the future? One of the I think the toxic aspects of the dominant ways of thinking about the future is that we colonize each other's minds and say, well, this is the best way to do it. The fundamentally ideological nature of much futures thinking. This is the better world. This is the way to make things great again. This is the way to create the citadel on the hill. Follow me. That's the colonizing of other people's imagination. It's the colonizing of the imagination that says this is what development is about. This is the way to be rich. This is the way to have the good life. All of those things involve colonization. And of course, there are very powerful instruments of that colonization in the form of things like movies, the Wakandas, the Terminators that provide us with negative and the futures that we want to avoid. And those become part of the framing for our imagination. But it's also the what I call the monoculture of the effort to colonize the future, which is, I know what's best for my children. I'm going to create the future for my children. They're going to do what I think is best for them, and I'm going to achieve it through a causal chain that I've backcasted in iron. Maybe there's 6, 7 scenarios, but they're all bounded. They're all scenarios within the framework of what I consider to be the good life for my children, which I will help impose on them. Now, the openness of that can be more or less, greater or more degrees of freedom, but fundamentally, there's a I would say, a pretension, and I would argue also something that is actually inimical to the flourishing of the autonomy and difference that characterizes change and transition in this universe. So futures literacy is about the power of imagination with respect to perception. And I really want to stress this very strongly. It's not initially about choice. The conflation and the kind of rationale, the justification, often rather grandiose, that we'll think about the future in order to achieve the future, seems to me to be skipping an absolutely fundamental step, and to also, in some ways, not understanding decision making properly, because we all know that it's not just the image of the future, credible or not credible, the forecast that determines whether a decision is made or not, in one way or another or not. It's the mood, it's the context, it's the degree of credibility and legitimacy, which can be completely unrelated to the actual, let's call it, evidence or hypotheses or rigor, but really are related to the fact that you have gray hair, or that you happen to be a man, or you happen to be a person with a lot of money in your bank account. And so the choice and decisions are made on that basis. We like to think from a technocratic perspective that because science is about certainty, which I believe it is not, but if the science, the emperor with direct access to the absolute truth is able to affirm that this will happen, then it's legitimate to do so, and therefore we conflate the future predicted by that source and the choice. But perception intercedes. Perception precedes choice. You cannot choose something you cannot perceive. If I tell you choose blah, 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 you don't know what it is, you can't choose it. And so the issue really becomes, what's the relationship of our imagination, different kinds of imaginaries, different kinds of futures, to perception? And here the definition of futures literacy does not privilege any one particular way of thinking about the future at all. It's meant to be an overarching umbrella for all the different ways that we imagine the future. We use the future for different reasons in different ways in different contexts. Knowing how to do so is the definition of futures literacy. Perception precedes choice. So how can we go about doing that? In other words, how can we begin to understand better our anticipatory systems and processes? Well, first of all, it's crucial to recognize that there's a wide variety. Divination is important here, but so too are the myths and the narrative structures, the hero's journey, all variety of mythologies and expectations that frame our imagination. Of course, there's the familiar and basic extrapolatory approach, which attempts to baseline and then thinks about the limits of plausibility, the preferable futures and alternative futures, which is fundamental and particularly important when we're going to make bets on the basis of what happens to be credible at the moment. At the moment, credibility rests a great deal on extrapolation based on empirical evidence, which means that it's limited by the past by definition. And we use that as a way to be safe in making our bets. And we're going to continue to make bets all the time. So this is not against or meant to privilege one particular way of seeing. The argument here is to have fluidity and awareness across the different ways of thinking. And the third category, that's one of emergence, is where the future is not used at all with respect to the probable or the desirable. It's used instead to realize the extent to which images of the future based on the past constrain our perception of the present. And that's the crucial anticipation for emergence. Many of you may have seen this framework. I won't go into it in detail. It's an ontological and epistemological framework. It distinguishes between AFF, anticipation for the future, and AFE, anticipation for emergence. It distinguishes between the different ways of knowing, the ways of knowing that are aimed at general, scalable statistics, common denominators, and the ways of knowing that are related to novelty, ephemerality, spontaneity, improvisation, and difference. Novelty, it might be novel and it might be completely ephemeral. It might have huge impact or it might not. There's no way of knowing initially. And so phenomena when they first appear do not have any particular necessity of scaling or not, but they exist. And furthermore, life's experiences consist primarily of things that don't scale. So it's crucial to recognize that what meaning and sense making in life is something that's not massified, scalable, or distributed. It's personal, it's momentary, it's ephemeral. And being able to include that and understand the relationship of our imagination to the appreciation. If I imagine that the only thing that's valuable or relevant is something that I can sell to somebody else, and that I can explain to them why I should be an influencer, and they'll pick up my hits on the internet, I'm losing most of what I experience, and I'm also twisting what I perceive and what I pay attention to and the choices I make towards scalability. So it's crucial, I think, to make this distinction between specificity, uniqueness, generable, and scalable. That gives us AA5 to AA6, and I've given tentative titles to these different sets of anticipatory assumptions that create frames for imagining the future. The approach that I've taken to thinking about scenarios or imaginary futures is to say they're all framed, and the assumptions that we use to make those frames then allow us to generate different scenarios within the frame. And that's so I'm not arguing for single scenarios. Everybody would, I think, know that, but for the diversity of scenarios, but recognizing the framing. And by the way, I mean, that's a simple, I think, modeling rigor issue, which is you need to specify your model in order to understand why you're generating certain images within that model. So the forecasting, destiny, creative reform, self-improvement, transitions and novelty, wisdom and not doing. I've looked at a little bit how this relates to outcomes, collective organization and personal organization. I'll make the slides available for people to take a deeper look, but you can see how this begins to allow us to tag or label different aspects of our anticipatory assumptions and the way in which those anticipatory assumptions play a role in inside in, inside out, and different systems thinking. It also allows us to design processes. So if the argument is that anticipatory systems and processes are something that exist in the present, and that anticipation is the way that non-existent future exists in the present, we can study anticipation, we can't study the future. So we study anticipation and we try to distinguish different kinds of anticipation, and in this sense, surface different anticipatory systems and processes. I've called this the microscope of the 21st century. It's the way of providing insights into the invisible assumptions that we take for granted. They can move from tacit to explicit, be made visible and distinguished so that we can understand the framing that people use for their hopes and their fears. Because after all, these scenarios generate the hopes and fears that are so crucial for people's daily lives, for how they react to things, for what they see, and then for what they do. So the framework is quite useful for design, it's quite useful for analysis, and it's quite useful for achieving the objective that I mentioned of understanding inside in, inside out, etc. So what are we trying to do in a more general sense? Well, I think we're overall trying to harness human agency to achieve goals. That's true. For instance, a peaceful, non-exploitative, non-extractive, diversified, fluid life with meaning. Sure, that's an objective. We want to infuse human agency with moral and ethical intentions. I wrote a piece back in 2011, Being Without Existing, the Futures Community at a Turning Point. It's available on ResearchGate if it's not available through Foresight. And the idea is fostering, cultivating, exploring the conditions that allow humans to use our capacity to imagine in ways that are more at home in the universe, in this particular universe. And one of the crucial aspects has to do with understanding that goal seeking is not the only way to use our imagination. So the goal here is to enhance human agency by enhancing its capacity, its competency. And that competency is similar to the competency of reading and writing, which is you do not know what it's going to be used for. It's a capability which has many different potential applications and actually is meant to enhance the capacity to perceive, to understand, to see, and to choose. Putting this in a slightly different way, perception before choice, where does future studies make a contribution? Future studies understood as the study of anticipatory systems. I want to distinguish on the axes, reactive, preparatory, discontinuity, continuity, unprecedented, improvisational. And here again, it's to try and help the policy process identify where the work is happening, because I think there are different ways of knowing. So different epistemologies that apply to these different quadrants, and there's different understanding of the way causality and agency plays a role. In the first quadrant on reform, doing, the active seeking of solutions and the solutions orientation means you're making trying to make choices and causal chains directly. You're working within a framework, valorizing the past, and this, relates to the inside in, inside out discussion, but is a retrofit strategy, a transition strategy, where again, the primary framing is continuity of one form or another. Discovery creation is a different category altogether, and it's really about imagining beyond what we already know. And that entails letting go as much as we can. And it's hard because we're bounded by language and we're bounded by the fact that you can't speculate on phenomena that don't exist. It's reality that creates possibilities, not possibilities that create reality, to paraphrase Henry Bergson. And so in the discovery creation side, not doing in the sense of the Tao is absolutely crucial. So it's not passivity; it's a different way of perceiving what emptiness means, and what, in a sense, the maturing of conditions has to do with change. All of you know about Transforming the Future. I think the book is now available in 4 languages, and we have 2 versions already there. There's been a new turn in future studies from my point of view. Future studies explores the theory and practice of conscious human anticipatory systems and processes. ASP take many forms and can be studied through a range of disciplinary approaches, taking into account the different kinds of futures that humans imagine, arising from different reasons and methods for imagining the futures. Future studies as a field enhances human understanding of anticipatory systems and processes, covers a wide range of applied activities related to the ways that humans actually use the future. This is the big tent of futures literacy. This is a AI-generated image, so it's kind of doesn't know how to spell, but this is to give you an idea of trying to include all the different ways that we think about the future. The value added of futures literacy, the science of specificity, managerialism, experimentalism, the science of generality, and how do we begin to encompass all of these different aspects at the same time. Futures literacy enhances innovation, agility, discovery, confidence, choice, capability, leadership, knowing, strategy, resilience. It does that because it allows us to perceive the present in a more open way. And that's, I think, a rather self-evident aspect of innovation, of agility, of discovery, of confidence. If you're more able to understand and perceive the world around you, you have more choice, you have more capability. Your leadership is not the leadership of finding the solution, but enhancing the capacity to experiment and test and learn. So it embraces knowing and strategy, to see genuinely distinct alternatives, to understand better inside in and inside and outside out thinking, so within the box and outside the box. And resilience, I think, is absolutely fundamental here, because the really crucial obstacle, and what I tried to stress at the outset when talking about the immaterial economy, is that difference is being produced all the time. That's a normal condition of the world around us. And in fact, let me take this to say, we do not create the future. Humans do not create the future. We're part of it, but it's much vaster and much more emergent than the intentionality and causality wielded by puny humans, I think, achieves. And having that humility, but also feeling integrated in that sense, part of the world, is crucial. That's one way of being more at home with difference, so less frightened by what is different, but also enhancing our capacity to generate difference and to be diversified. And so this is a ceteris paribus assumption, but diversification is a better resilience strategy than putting all your eggs in one basket. So futures literacy contributes to all of that. What difference does it make? Futures literacy is a competency that I think enhances foresight, that enhances strategic planning, that enhances the way in which we create our hopes and our fears, ideologies, but also letting go, is that it alters the way we see the world. And this is the Ptolemaic system, where the sun goes around the earth. This is the Copernican system, where the earth goes around the sun. We all know that the sun stays where it's going to stay, and that really knowing this doesn't make a huge difference to what happens in the morning when the sun comes up. But we know that it has changed what we see. It has changed what we imagine. It has changed what we resist. It changes what we preserve. It changes how we preserve what we want to preserve, our relationship between continuity, discontinuity, permanence, birth, and death. And it changes the conditions of change. So that's the end of my presentation. This is the last slide. This slide is from Sampé, and it's a kind of a humoristic way of saying, do we really want to approach use of the future this way? The idea that we somehow know which way to go, and somebody should follow the grand leader. Why don't we have great ideas, great visions? Everybody gets behind the great vision, even if it's plural scenarios of how to get to the SDGs. It remains a relatively monoculture, goal-driven, causal determinism, and invites this kind of expectation, and also this kind of, can I say, underdevelopment of people's capacity to think about the future. So how we anticipate matters. It changes the present. That's it for my presentation.